Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 57 of IGEL Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got Patrick Toner with me on the XenTegra side. Patrick, how's it going?
Andy, how you doing? Going good. Just getting settled in down here in Florida, enjoying the daily thunderstorms. A little bit different than where I'm from, but yeah, doing well. Doing well. Good. Glad to be here.
Have you gotten involved in the Citrix user group in Jacksonville yet? I'm going to bug you about that.
Yeah, no, not outside of just sending messages. So I plan to attend the next, few events here. Just get really plugged in. Definitely excited to get involved there.
Yeah. Well, I think they would welcome you as a leader because they can always have more leaders. And I'm gonna get involved in the Charlotte one all over again. It's fledgling. And I know Brad Swansea on our team who just joined us is going to do the Atlanta one as well. So just getting involved, trying to help the community. Just like, unfortunately, Citrix doesn't have the power of the IGEL community. They totally set it up incorrectly, in my opinion. All right, Chris Feeney's with us from IGEL. Chris, how's it going?
It's going great. Feeling a little refreshed going into this week, short week, but ready to rock and roll. So
what city is that you have in your background?
No idea.
Okay.
Honestly, it's a corporate background that IGEL corporate IT has put into Zoom. So to me, it represents the fact that I don't have to commute into the office, into the big downtown office, or somewhere. I can actually work from anywhere, including this location where I get a nice view of the city.
We were monkeying around. Before we got on this call, doing some Zoom testing on my side, and I've been playing with Teams and VDI and IGEL the last few days. So Zoom virtual backgrounds work in the VDI version of Zoom, correct?
Yeah, I want to say for the listeners, we did a podcast on that. There's some instructions on how to do that. I don't remember off the top exactly what those are, but there is information on how to make that work reliably.
Yeah.
When you're doing the offloading piece.
Chris. That was a recent episode.
Yeah. So go back and listen to it on 1.5. You'll hear us talk like Minnie Mouse. Like
listen.
So Chris is doing the Zoom from a VDI session from an IGEL device, correct?
That is correct.
What flavor of VDI are you in?
It's my custom VDI that I created.
The homegrown?
Yeah, let's just say it's similar to RDP.
Okay. And you know what? I'll highlight that because a persistent VDI, whether it's in Azure, whether it's using AVD, whether it's using Citrix, whether it's using VMware, whether it's using other technologies that are mainstream, there's still benefit in that because it's available to you anywhere. You could put security around it. I am so frustrated with meeting customers that have pigeonholed digital workspaces or VDI specifically into one niche group in their company, and they haven't seen the vision for what it could do for the more power users in the company. I struggle with that all the time.
You know, that's a great point. I was just scrolling through LinkedIn and I happened to come across somebody posted, I guess that it looked to me like it was some kind of exercise app or something, but it was like every day he was tracking kind of has he completed this circle, and I guess that was like stuff like, has he taken a walk? Has he been standing? Has he all this other stuff? And he said, when he was going to the office, the most days in a row that he was able to complete this was like 5. With remote work, working from home, having that flexibility, he said, I'm now on like a streak of like day 45 or whatever it was. It was clearly, and then he just hit upon all the reasons why that flexible remote work has just made things better for him in a lot of ways and productive and all that stuff. It just highlighted all the reasons we talked about. It's just, there's so many more tangible benefits to having a real digital workspace. And I have no idea if this guy is using Citrix or VMware or even IGEL, but the point is all the stuff we've talked about is there's much more about it than the technical nuts and bolts pieces. It's the benefits employees receive and all that stuff that.
So in other words, it took a pandemic to make us learn how to work smarter.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll highlight for you. Last week I went to New York. I used my VDI from a plane very successfully. I used my VDI from a bus heading into the city while in the tunnel.
I saw that.
It's pretty amazing. And all that's enabled from, me grabbing a thin client on the way out the door and having, 12 hours of battery life while I bounce around the city on decent or better networks.
Yeah. I mean, in this world of 5G, LTE alone would be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I saw that. Thank you for continuing to advance the cause there and show what's possible.
Well, and the other part of what's possible, and we're going to tie it back to this. Well, real quick, Patrick, you're using a Windows device right now, right? Doing Zoom. Right?
Sad face emojis out. Yeah, I'm on a Microsoft Surface going local right now. So we're kind of covering all the bases.
This is an IGEL podcast, by the way. We're going to have to ban you.
I'm out. I'll see you guys. Thank you for having me.
Patrick will probably have a Windows update right in the middle of this.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, there is one pending.
So, but I bring that up because when you have a true digital workspace that includes VDI, that includes x86 presented apps and SaaS apps, because part of my story last week on my thin client was the fact that I had a browser on it. And there were multiple times that I didn't even have to go into VDI. I went into my digital workspace and from there went where I needed to go. Mm-hmm. I'm working with somebody on your team, actually, Chris, to come up with a presentation that just walks through what all the options are. Because people don't have a clue. A lot of them, most of them don't have a clue what all the different options are. They just know the one they kind of grew up with and haven't been able to deviate. But the whole point in that conversation is browser, and we're going to talk about browser and what IGEL has done to include a modern day, very accepted, supportable browser in Chromium in today's discussion.
Yeah, and not only that, but the power of the community will get highlighted since this is a community podcast today.
Yep. So let's jump in. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. Hopefully I got the right one up here.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's
the one.
There's a blog that goes with it. Right. Is that the one? There it is. Yep. For those watching on video.
In the IGEL community, someone, what's this guy's name? Posted
Leon. I'm going to get this wrong. Leon Beitsch. Probably butchered that.
So the title of the blog is How to IGEL OS with Chromium, not Chrome, but Chromium, not Chrome OS, not Chrome browser, but Chromium browser. I'll throw the word browser in there, guide. But before we did that, between the two of you guys, let's walk down memory lane as to what IGEL and maybe others have done in the form of browsers over the past decade. Where did we start?
Sure. Yeah. I think for a long time now, back when I was introduced to IGEL, at least 5-6 years ago, whatever it was, the option has always been the Firefox browser. IGEL has for a long time included the Firefox browser as a local option, which for years was a huge competitive advantage against the other thin client solutions, especially from, Dell and HP, where for a long time there was no browser option. So Firefox has kind of been the standard for a long time. And then recently, I want to say within the last year and a half, maybe less, maybe it was closer to a year ago, IGEL officially entered a supported version of the Chromium browser. So today, IGEL OS has two built-in browser options. You still have the Firefox browser and you have the Chromium browser. And of course, for anyone listening, Chromium is the open source browser that pretty much all the other browsers are based on now. Obviously, Google Chrome is based on Chromium. Microsoft Edge is based on Chromium. So, so it really is kind of the underlying open source browser that powers all of the other mainstream browsers, with the exception of obviously, your things like Brave browser, or Firefox, or some of the other ones. So it really does give you a lot of flexibility. It gives you a lot of things. Now, part of what we're talking about today is because the Chromium browser comes out of the box. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles as, for example, Chrome. It looks like Chrome. The icon is the same as Chrome with a different color. But you need to customize it a little bit if you want to use it the way you want to use Chrome. And that's what this blog does such a good job of, just kind of laying out a guide on how to change settings. But that's where we are today. Many people use the Chromium browser; they prefer it, and that's fully built into IGEL OS now.
And Patrick, how much of that is they prefer it, which is probably true because that's what they know. How much of that is that's what applications that you're going to access, SaaS, software as a service applications, that's what they require, that's what they're written for. It wasn't that long ago that things were written for Internet Explorer 6, 7, whatever. But that ship kind of sailed, and now there's the idea is a browser. You don't need to be specific with the application versions, but you kind of need to be specific with the browser edition version type.
Yeah, that's true for the most part, right? They, a lot of SaaS-based, browser-based applications will tell you, hey, we support these few browsers. That's what we officially support. One thing I've always heard in the past, customers have told me many times, yeah, I like Firefox, but I can't manage Firefox. That's why we don't use it. The nice thing about IGEL, that's always been a good pivot, is that, well, hey, IGEL OS and the UMS allows you to manage Firefox policy. But with Chromium, because other browsers are based on it, yeah, it is going to be more, I guess, supported in, at least in my experience with, browser-based applications. However, there are ways, and this guide goes through it a little bit, where you can kind of trick the website into thinking you're coming from a different browser or a different operating system. And that's something that you can do, which this guide kind of touches on some of these options. But yeah, it's generally coming from a requirement, to your point, Andy, maybe not always as from a preference standpoint.
Do you two guys have a point in time in your career where you saw, Chrome start to take off, but yet applications were Internet Explorer based and you were in this no man's land?
Oh, yeah.
So that's interesting. I was just recently just dealt with this, right? So my employment history, where I was before, the main browser, it was a web-based UI, but it was built off of Internet Explorer. And it wasn't until recently, like recent versions, where they began to allow some of the administrative functionality to be used in other browsers, Chromium based for that matter. So in generally speaking, that's Chrome or Edge. But for a very long time, you had to be on a certain browser version, and that was obviously embedded into Microsoft. And now Microsoft is finally, basically end of life for the ever Explorer. But there were so many of it across the years, so many applications based on that. Chrome would get you in, but may not have all that functionality. And so there was, the sea change, whereas as the rise of SaaS and stuff like that, some of these things already out of the gate supported some of these other browsers. A lot of folks began to use, Macs and bring your own kind of thing. And the Safari was their browser of choice in a lot of respects. And, the user experience with Safari is, it's different if you're not used to that type of browser, but Chrome and Chromium rather has kind of become a pretty good standard across the board for application support.
And how long was it that we were into Chrome/Chromium? First of all, is there, as far as you guys know, is there any difference other than the fact that one is officially supported by Google and one is open source?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. The Chromium browser is the open source browser that's underlying Chrome. Google takes that browser, adds, a bunch of things to it. For example, their media codecs and all these different things that allows it to play, for example, YouTube or other types of videos. They, add their ability to manage the browser with the Google Enterprise Suite, and they repackage it as Chrome. And it's very similar, in its application. But Chromium is really just kind of it for most end users, it'll seem like a stripped down version of Chrome, but really it's the underlying base of Chrome.
Yeah. And so how long into the world of Chrome was it before they started understanding the need for the enterprise management capabilities? I know there's admin packs for Active Directory that have been around for a while. Google at some point decided, hey, this needs to become an enterprise business-worthy browser. And can you use those ADMs to manage Chromium, or is it all done through some type of INI file or JSON file?
Well, specifically with what we're talking about today with IGEL, the beauty of it is you can fully manage the Chromium browser from the UMS console, right? So you don't really need that Google management layer or any other layer. You just basically you can edit the INI file and JSON files if you want to via UMS and different policies or profiles that you're pushing down. But there's also some really cool built-in options to put policies in place, and the not the blog. The blog kind of gives the introduction, but the guide here that I'm not going to say his name because I'll probably Leon here. Leon, I won't go with the last name. What he put together, it kind of walks through like how to put those general policies in. So that's again the nice thing about UMS. You don't need any other management layer. You can just use UMS and manage the policy for that browser.
Right. Well, that's the key too, right? Just UMS is going to take it a long way. Okay, so let's walk through this blog and understand how he's approaching it. Chris, you want to take the first section here?
Yeah. So it's just at a high level, the IGEL community has provided or given some awards for those that are contributing regularly and also with content and other things to the benefit of the community. And they have this thing called VIP. And so Leon is a VIP, and there's been some really cool projects that some of the VIPs have done. And so my general understanding is he kind of, obviously had great interest in this. And, he highlights the fact that in August of, it's hard to believe it was 2021. It feels like it was before that, but in 11.04.100, IGEL released and added Chromium officially, initially experimentally, and then that's since changed. But it was an opportunity to obviously, okay, what can we do with it? Besides, now we have a second browser in the product, and obviously, if you look at the Chromium project or whatever open source, there's a lot of customization. And so he took it upon himself to kind of pull together some of these ideas and then contribute back to the community with this how-to guide, which as we'll look at it here in a minute, he maintains it. And most recently, I think the last update was in April, so not too far behind, like April of 2022. So kudos to Leon for doing that. Certainly appreciate that, and really anybody that has something that they would like to contribute to the community. That's what we want to highlight here on this blog.
And he actually calls out 3/4 of the global desktop browser market is Chrome based, Chrome something.
Yeah, I mean Edge, Opera, Vivaldi. I didn't know Brave was based on Chromium. I use Brave on my mobile phone occasionally just to try it out. But yeah.
I was just going to say the same, Chris. I stand corrected. I earlier said Brave was not Chromium based, and I use it personally too on all my devices. I prefer Brave, but yeah, I didn't realize it was Chromium based. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but compatibility. I mean, you can still obviously see. It kind of reminds me back in the day. You had was it Netscape? Originally, they became something, but IE began to emerge, and it was those two browsers that were fighting for market share for a long time. And here we are. And then Chrome appeared, and here we are years later with that sort of becoming the standard accepted. So, but that's what we've got here. So there's, a little further down on the blog, he kind of talks about, just an IT administrator, some of the things that
Chris,
Patrick talked about earlier.
You mentioned Netscape, and I've listened recently to a podcast on the browser wars from the 90s. Early 2000s. I mean, the fact that we've, and here's the way I'll put it. The manipulation of trying to get everybody to have to use a certain browser because it was built into the operating system was one play, right? But what happened is crowd-sourced, kind of crowdsourced, but crowd demand has driven us towards a single browser. So the world wanted us to go all over the place with browsers, but the ability to actually leverage applications, the applications really, and customer user UI drove us back to almost a single browser, not 100%, but at least a base code for a single browser. And that's kind of how we got to this Chromium thing.
Yeah, no, this is great. Yeah, and what's interesting, one other thing is, I know we've talked about this before, Andy, but just self-taught, and he's giving it back. And, you know, those things that you feel really good about or whatever, I mean, you know, taking the opportunity to share that knowledge. I mean, I think that's certainly from your own personal brand, you know, that's really kind of, I mean, Doug Brown kind of highlights a lot of that. Really, there's power in giving back to the community. And this is just one example of that. And I'm sure people have come to him since he's put this out there, you know, and obviously, you know, one of my favorite sayings is always learning, right? Always continuous learning. I never feel like I've arrived, you know, and this is a skill set that I'm not as up to speed on, but I'm excited to kind of dig through this blog and what this guide has. So.
Okay. So anything in this post up here, this part of the conversation that we need to cover that we haven't covered yet?
No, I think we're good. Let's get into the meat of this.
All right. So this is about, what is this, 22 pages of content. And the main concept here is how to manage Chromium browser for IGEL from within UMS, right?
Yeah, through profiles, and that could be applied, but yes.
Hey, and real quick, going into this X number of years ago, a year ago, this would have been a custom partition. Now it's baked into the operating system by default.
That's correct.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. And you know, a lot of the things that this guide is doing, if you use this as a custom partition, you still could have done a lot of the things that Leon is pointing out here, but it would have been done via just, a command. You'd have a super long command with all these different flags that you want to turn on and off on the Chrome or Chromium browser. But the cool thing is now there's built-in settings where you can just kind of add policies, and as long as you know what they are, you can change the change the switch on them.
Right. And guys, how much of this is just uplifted by the idea that there is an open source version of Chromium these days, Chromium. Like how long has that been around? Do you guys know?
The Chromium project? I don't. I want to say, I mean, the first time I saw Chrome, I want to say 20 years ago. I could have that wrong, but I mean, so Chromium would have had to have existed before that as a
You think
project.
so? I think Chromium is a backdoor way of getting more Chrome out there. I think Chrome browser was probably just a Google thing for a while. I'd have to go look it up.
Yeah, I just found that I'm going to, hopefully it's chromium.org, and then there's Chromium projects. It's an open source project behind the Google Chrome browser and Google Chrome OS respectively. So it's like, which one was first,
So 2008 it was released. So 13 years ago was the first release of Chromium.
Yeah. I can imagine
it was mainly Google developers that configured it.
For those listening on the podcast who are driving or will be listening, they're probably driving around going, folks, it was Google first.
I can't imagine Google started open source, but then they probably saw the power of open source in terms of iterative development, as well as the ability to get more Google-oriented things on more devices.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because that Neverware, that was based on Chromium OS, and Google ultimately bought them and now kind of converged them. So, but regardless, here we are talking about how to customize Chromium. So let's get after it.
Well, okay. So where do we want to go in this conversation? We got 20 minutes left. Is there any, where do you guys want me to go? Because I need you guys to kind of drive it.
Yeah, I would say, because we can, it might be a little, extremely boring if we just dive down into policies and all that, but maybe you just talk about some of the practical reasons somebody might want to do this, right? I was talking to Chris earlier about this. Recently was working with a customer. They have a training software. So they had to, their users, they had these training centers when they were using IGEL to just deploy out to these training centers. And they originally were running Windows in there, but they wanted to kind of shrink that footprint. So there wasn't a VDI broker on the back end. They weren't running Citrix or VMware or anything like that. It was just purely based on, hey, these users need to get on a device, a browser comes up, they're presented with a testing website login, and then they need to log in and do their training and take tests and different things they do in there. So the interesting thing is, so basically, I think Andy, I think you mentioned it earlier. One of the things, there was a requirement on this website where you had to come from Internet Explorer on a Windows, obviously from a Windows device, because that's the only place you could run Internet Explorer natively. So what we were able to do is configure some policies. Now, in this use case, we used Firefox. I can't remember why, but you could do the exact same thing in Chromium here. And basically, we just changed a couple of flags in the browser settings from the IGEL UMS, and we tricked the website to think we were coming from Internet Explorer and a certain version of it. And it worked beautifully. The users were able to log right in. Now, before we did that fix, when the users would hit the website, they would get an error. Hey, you're not on a supported browser. As soon as we made that change, again, just via IGEL profile, very simple, pushed it out. The website let them log in. The users were testing. They were taking their tests, whatever they do in there. And it worked great. And now that customer doesn't have to patch Windows devices. They don't have to, all this overhead just for users to take tests. They can have a lightweight, secure operating system and leverage these types of really cool policies to kind of trick that website into thinking they're coming from another browser. So that's just one instance. I'll throw it out there, Chris, Andy. I don't know if you guys have had, different or similar type experiences, but that's definitely a type of thing where this guide would be very useful.
I'm putting in the chat. I just found an article that basically kind of talks about that same issue, right? Where you go to a website and it identifies or says it's not a supported browser, and then this is sort of walking you through how to solve that problem.
Now, is that not a supported browser because it was looking for Internet Explorer, or because it was looking for full-blown Chrome?
It was looking for Internet Explorer. So it actually checks. There's different things in the browser. When it hits the website says, "Okay, show me your information. Show me your papers." Right, yeah. And the browser presents, "Hey, here's what I am. I'm this browser. I'm this version." So basically, you're just modifying that information. So the website just says, "Okay, you're good. Come on in," and then you're up and running.
And the key term here is the engine, right? Isn't what do we call the browser? Is it the browser engine that all needs to be meet certain standards or certain versions, and that's what the website's looking for? Or is there a different term?
You got me there. I think from a functionality standpoint, that's probably true, right? So there could be instances where an application says, "Listen, you have to use Internet Explorer," and there might be functionality reasons for that. However, you generally what these websites do, Chris mentioned a company he used to work for earlier. And back when I spent time in healthcare, this may 100% be related to the company he worked for, but I used to manage Imprivata. And that forced me to come in from Internet Explorer. Now, in theory, I could do the same thing and hit my Imprivata appliance doing what I did with IGEL. Would everything work? I don't know. That's another story. And that might come down to why these websites say, "Hey, you have to use Internet Explorer versus Chrome versus whatever." But that's where the testing comes in.
Hey guys, is there any type of use case where you still would want to create your own custom partition of Chromium, or would you want to just go with what's in the operating system?
I mean, I would say don't use Chromium. There's Chrome, but I would just say use this or other material to take what's there. And if for some reason there's, something that you can't, then.
So let me clarify the question. So you can either use Chromium, which is baked in, or you could create a custom partition using the Linux version of Chrome. What Feeney's saying, don't use the custom partition unless you have a really, really good reason to.
Right. I mean, this guide kind of talks about what's possible as far as customization, whereas I think we alluded to it earlier with when installing Chrome, any customization piece you would be part of this long string of commands or something like that. I might stand incorrect on that, but then there's also questions of, do you want Google's fangs being used on your endpoint? So
what's an example when you might use Mozilla in the IGEL world? Firefox.
So great question. For me, I dealt with like which browser kind of option when in my first couple of years, learning the difference between how a smart card might act if you're using Firefox versus Chrome, for example, which browser was supported for logging into a website with a smart card in the federal space. And so there was times when I spent just trying to get, is Firefox the right OS or the right browser to get in with, or should we try another method, or are there modifications on the Firefox browser to make it work better? So I remember dealing with that on occasion, far enough removed that I can't remember all the details, but there were some user experience differences when using Chrome to get into that same website, usually what prompt they might have, or using Firefox to get into that same place.
I think about it a little more practical too, Chris. I mean, well, obviously that's a very practical application.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, it's to your point, it's just things working correctly. Or what I've seen is requirements coming down from InfoSec in a company. So,
mm-hmm.
for example, I had back in the day when there was only Firefox, I was working with a financial customer, and their InfoSec team said, we do not allow Firefox in the environment. So we tried to go back and forth with them a little bit. Hey guys, this is really secure. Here's all the options you could do. And it was like full stop. No, you cannot put Firefox in this environment. For whatever reason, that was their policy. So back then we leveraged the custom partition and put Chrome in there, and they were happy as could be. So I think a lot of times it comes down to what you're talking about, Chris, the requirements of the technology you're connecting to,
mm-hmm.
but also a lot of times this is driven by InfoSec. This is driven by the guys that we work with, the guys who are managing IGEL. They don't always have a choice, right? They're told these are the browsers you can use, and that's why it's nice to have that flexibility. Now, if it's me and I'm the customer, my order of preference is going to be number one. I want to go Firefox because it's been in the IGEL OS for a long time. It's very mature with its integrations. Chromium will be my next choice just because it's also integrated, and a lot of those options are built in. So it comes down to manageability. And then my third option would be, okay, if I'm forced to use Edge for Linux, or I'm forced to use Chrome or whatever, then I'll go that route because my company's telling me to, or because my backend solution is requiring it and it doesn't work with the other ones. But that would be kind of my order of importance personally if I'm the admin.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. A little story. At home, my daughter's been doing an internship, and she has basically, one of the tasks is take pictures and videos and that she receives, and then upload them to Dropbox. And she's been doing that through a browser. Now the browser she's been using for over a year plus has been Firefox. But I didn't know until like last week that she was really having a hard time. These files would all of a sudden just not finish uploading. And so without really doing much troubleshooting, I said, well, let's try another browser. And she had Edge on there, and I had her go and we thought maybe it was the Wi-Fi connection so I had her plug into my Ethernet. And after using Edge a few times, those issues went away. And now maybe there's a setting in Firefox that could have solved that better, but for her, a bunch of frustration with one browser turned into, now I'm getting things done faster with another browser. So, there may be situations like that where it dictates for different reasons, which browser you have to use or which one is supported better, based on some of these cloud apps, right? Maybe they code it to certain browsers or interactions, but that was just one scenario that recently came up.
Let me ask you guys a question on this. And, I'm curious, both of your thoughts, but it seems, Andy, you've been in Citrix, world, obviously a long, long time, since the beginning. What do you think as far as, I kind of see things maybe moving more towards the browser being the main application that people are going to use. How do you see that going? Like, do you see, like, for example, IGEL maybe relying more on the browser in the future versus the Citrix Workspace app? How do you kind of see that going?
Well, it really comes down to a conversation of what is the main application that the customer user is going to be in all day. I spoke to a former Citrix sales manager, executive a couple of weeks ago, and he was throwing Citrix and VMware under the bus because he said, hey, I work from a Chromebook all day. And I didn't say it to him, but I was like, but you don't do real work. You don't produce anything. Like, your idea of work is an email. Like, that's work, or going into a Salesforce CRM or something. For people who do real production work, where you have to actually go out and produce documents and files and things, that x86 workload, and maybe most specifically the Windows, most widely used Microsoft application in the world, in my opinion, or is without a doubt Windows, and followed by browsers and Outlook and all that good stuff. And Outlook's another great example, right? I mean, I probably use the online version of Outlook more than anybody I know, but I still run into scenarios where I got to open up Windows or open up Outlook Fat Client somewhere in my virtual world and use it. Patrick, there's no doubt it's going to become more and more important to have a browser that can get to all the different clouds, software as a service out there. But we're still probably a decade or two away from everything just happens in a browser. There's just a lot of legacy applications out there, and there's a lot of evolution that even the best companies in the world, Microsoft, for example, can't make it on par as they could an x86 app.
Got it. I look at something like an Okta, and I had a customer one time. They had VMware in the back end, Citrix, different web, sites they would have to access, and they kind of brought it all together with Okta. And I thought that was a really great use case of just, hey, it's all in one place, it's all here, and they did all the the identity management, single, dual factor, everything was kind of integrated. Citrix also would, and VMware have solutions that do similar things. And I just, that's great feedback. I think it's just changing so quickly in that respect. So many more things go on the web. And I'm the same as you, Eddie. I use Outlook in the browser full time, pretty much, unless I absolutely have to go into the actual Windows application. I think it's just a better experience.
I think that's the case because I've tried different browsers with Office.com, and I can tell there's a different user experience, even the layout, depending on which browser I'm using. But it is a lot of functional things that even more and more less of a need to use the local install of an app. So I do think that long tail of Windows, these apps, and as these web-based versions of them become much more functional, or even mobile versions in a mobile OS world, that need for a Windows desktop to run an app is becoming less and less. So I do agree that that's the trend we're seeing. But Windows has a long history in the enterprise world, and we'll probably continue to see applications developed for Windows up until the time a browser is completely sufficient.
I mean, there's a lot of apps that are going to not have all the features. I mean, it's one thing to make new ones in a browser, which I think happens a lot these days, but not totally. Okay. So guys, what else do we want to cover in terms of this document and what he's showing here? I think it's just important for people to find the blog, the original one we mentioned, and then from there you can link to here and get to
I think what stood out to me was in building some of the customization pieces, he does a really nice job of here's what the table is, but then here's a screenshot and some of those settings that there's some policy settings in the custom application that he kind of calls out, which I would say is definitely more on the very advanced side. If you've not had a chance to really dig into some of those. And in fact, I actually sent this guide over to one of our developers to see if there's anything that on a project that we're working on that maybe we could leverage with Chromium to maybe get some customization pieces, maybe advance this project a little forward. I have no idea, but we'll certainly take a look at it. But I think, and it's a 20-page guide, so it's pretty meaty. We'll just go with that. And it's detailed as far as what versions of stuff, that type of thing. So, definitely encourage folks to go to there and try it out, and certainly give Leon as many kudos as you possibly can for putting this together and maintaining it.
Yeah, it's very detailed and lots of screenshots, which, as you know, if you put documentation together before, it's hard to get all that in there. And
there's a guy named Carl who works for another VAR who lives off of this stuff, right? This is kind of what he does. So screenshots and text are always helpful. Would you not agree? And I wouldn't want to be that as my main job, but anyway.
I always appreciate it on the other side. I like a lot of visual screenshots and things like that, so I'm not confused.
Yeah.
But I don't like doing it, but I do like reading it.
Yeah, that's good to have people out there doing that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how they have time to do that, but
that's the other piece. But if it's their passion, by all means, feed the beast.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I've got to wrap. I don't sit in the closet all day. I actually have to go have meetings all day, every day. So that's where I got to go next. Appreciate you guys joining.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, take care, guys.
Take care, everybody.
Time. Thanks.